Hello.
Chakula chai yangu bado.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Father.
Good morning.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Father.
Yes, Father.
Hello. Is anybody hearing me?
Yes, Father.
Yes, Father.
Hello.
No.
Nobody is here hearing the other side. I don't know. Built-in speakers.
No.
Hello, good morning. Can you unmute yourself? Can anybody hear me from the other end?
Yes, Father, you are clear.
Yes, Father, I hear you.
Hello, can you hear me? Can anybody respond?
Yes, Father.
What is that's strange. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning,
Father.
Father.
Maybe has a problem, but
Father, we can hear you.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Father.
Father.
Okay, ndio kuna shida. Kama Father ako na tabu.
Hello.
Hello, Father.
Hear a ringtone? No. Hello.
Hello.
It's not so good.
What is the problem?
Hello. I don't hear the ringtone though. Can anybody hear me from the other end? No?
Yes, Father.
Now select one system. Internal inbuilt. Hello.
Hello, Father.
Hello. Wow. Out. Let's try this.
Yes.
For your system. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you are clear.
Hello?
Hello.
Is anybody hearing me the other end?
Yeah.
Yes, you are hearing you, Father. Kuna shida. Iko on yako. Iko on.
Audio, yes, that's what I want, so that I can also hear myself as I talk to you. Okay. So then, welcome to this lecture of today. And we are going to continue from where we left last time. If anybody cannot follow me, kindly just write it on the chat. Just write it on the chat. If you're not hearing me, just write it on the chat. And yes, I can see people here want to be admitted. Admit all. Can you all see my? Can you all see my PowerPoint slides?
Yes, Father, we are seeing.
Do you hear yourself? No, I don't. Why I don't? I have no idea. No, this is not. It's not the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, let's mute. Stopped last time, and those of you who are present in our last presentation, I took you through the milieu, or the milieu of St. Francis, or the world in which Francis lived, as a way of situating ourselves before we proceed with this presentation. Remember, the topic is on the fundamentals of Franciscan poverty. I have sent the material on the model, namely the general course outline, and of course, I have also put this particular presentation that I'm presenting now. So if you have not visited your model, you would only have to visit your model, and you'll get this material there. So the let's have a quick recap of what we did last week, before presentation of a new topic. So it is poverty and the poor in the message and life of Francis of Assisi. And we did say that to understand the poverty and who the poor are in the time of Francis, and you're talking of the period between 1182 to 1226, it is important to understand the following context. The first context that we dealt with was the religious context. We also looked at the political context and, of course, the socio-economic context. Now, in relation to religious context, we did say that the church of the day was at the height of its power and influence, and it was powerful and rich, and she was nevertheless undergoing, somebody wants to be admitted, let me see who it is, Anthony Camindo. Okay, she was nevertheless undergoing inner turmoil and was challenged by movements that sought to recall her to the evangelical imperatives of one, humility, and the second was of the service to the poor. These are the two important evangelical imperatives that the church, because of her influence in power, had actually forgotten or had sidelined, and therefore it was undergoing this inner turmoil. Remember, when we talk about the political context, we are saying in the political arena, in the Italian peninsula, in which Assisi is situated, was torn between, of course, the papacy and, of course, the German Empire. When you're talking of the papacy, you're talking with the Pope and those surrounding him, the papal empire. So it was growing in material wealth, and at the same time, the German Empire was as well growing in material wealth. So there was an emergence of free towns trying to liberate themselves from the cultures of both the German Empire and the papacy, because of this competition that was going between them in terms of material prosperity. Now, when we look at the socio-economic context, this is just a recap. It's just a summary of what we did last week. The socio-economic fabric. You see that the socio-economic fabric of the day was undergoing also a radical revolution. In this revolution, we see, for example, the feudal laws. We did say that these feudal laws were the topmost class in the society. They owned very large estates, and therefore they were seen as the highest class in terms of economic well-being. So the aristocratic nobles or proprietors of immense estates in terms of lands and also buildings. And it was being progressively replaced by the rising strength. And this rising strength was the strength of rich merchants. And these merchants, this was the second class, social class, in the society, were called the bourgeoisie. The bourgeois is French, for these very influential, rich people. So the merchants was slowly taking over. They were taking control and become important centers of activity and abundant population. And why was that the case? It is because they introduced commerce. They introduced commerce, or exchange of goods with money. You remember before it was barter trade, you would exchange goods with goods. But with the introduction of commerce, now there is exchange of goods using money. And the father of Francis actually belonged to this class of the merchants. He would go and buy merchandise or clothes from the southern France and bring these to Italy, and particularly to Assisi, where he came from. So there was the flow of money. And this, of course, flow of money created a new governing class. And of course, the creation of a new governing class, this is of the rich merchants, weakened the feudal power, who were powerful, as we have said above there, that there were aristocratic nobles who owned immense properties. So their power was gradually weakened by this new governing class of the merchants. And of course, not only weakened the feudal lords, but also impoverished peasants who would not have the money for exchanging with goods. And of course, attracted in towns and their surroundings marginalized and poor people. Marginalized and poor people. As we see, this is a characteristic also of many of our towns and cities, where you have poor people going to towns and cities to beg for alms. So this was also in the time of Francis. So beggars and lepers were the most visible of these people. Now, looking at just some people here, also 17, Joseph wants to join us. Okay. Now, when you look at Christianity, I did say that in continuity with the Jewish roots, because Christianity, of course, came from Judaism. So in continuity with its Jewish roots, it had marked Europe with its stamp. And therefore, poverty was considered an evil to be eliminated. Remember, in Judaic belief or in Judaism, there is what we call the anaim way, or the poor of the Lord. And of course, those were seen as those who were vulnerable in society, and therefore there was a common call to help them or to alleviate a poverty that actually impoverished them or actually robbed them of their human dignity. So care for the poor was practiced both as an individual gesture, that is giving alms to the poor people, and also as a collective duty. So as an individual gesture, but also as a collective duty. Now, institutions had been created to welcome pilgrims, to care for the sick, and to educate children. And of course, abbeys, these are the leaders in big monasteries, saw it as their duty to receive the poor, clothe them, and also to feed them. It is in this world that Francis, the brilliant and ambitious son of the rich merchant, began with the 10 companions an evangelical adventure of faith and conversion, where the theme of poverty, understood in different sense, would play a great part. So it is important when we're discussing this topic on the fundamentals of the Franciscan poverty to see or to understand the milieu in which Francis came from. We also did look at Francis and the paradoxes of poverty. Remember, when you're talking of a paradox is something that seems to contradict itself. Now, with a gap of 8 centuries, when talking of 8 centuries, we are talking of the gap that has elapsed between the time that Francis existed and today. We are talking of 8 centuries, separates us from him in order to help us to know him. We are fortunate to have in our disposition a certain number of writings recognized as authentically his. So in this, he presents the essence of the vision of God and humanity. Furthermore, an abundant contemporary literature, that is the work of more or less eyewitnesses, recount from different points of view his life and his activities. And the question of poverty and the poor holds an important place in this, not only writing, but also eyewitnesses. So in considering what Francis says about in his writings, one is struck by a paradox. And what is this paradox? The paradox will talk about poverty as good and a poverty as evil. So how can something be good and evil at the same time? That is the paradox that we are talking about. So according to him, poverty is at the same time good, an ideal that he embraces following Christ. So when he's talking of poverty as something good, he will look at it from the point of view of what you call inner disposition. And that inner disposition is an ideal that embraces what? Following Christ. And also, he will also look at it as evil that he wants to address by seeking to relieve those who are affected by it. And how? He writes this: from being wealthy above all, the Word, the Son of God, as we read in the gospel that was read in Christmas Day, the day mass, with that prologue of St. John. The Word was God, the Word was with God, the Word took flesh and dwelt among us. So Francis would write that from being wealthy above all, the Word of God, that is the Son of God, chose poverty in becoming human. And what does that mean? Francis and his brothers should apply themselves to following his humility, that is Christ's humility and poverty, in renouncing all power, refusing to top places, and making themselves servants, small and subjects to all. This you get from what you call the first rule of 1221 that Francis wrote, and I'm sure you are dealing this with one of the Franciscan lecturers which teaching you writings of Francis and Clare. The so-called regula non volata is the first rule, and you get this in the complete works of Francis and Clare by Armstrong. So the highest poverty that Francis sees in Jesus Christ is creator becoming a creature, or lowering himself, he who was a creator, to assume our human nature, or if you put it in other words, hiding his divinity in our humanity. Now, the poverty of God designated not a social condition. Remember here we are distinguishing between two things: a social condition and something that you voluntarily opt for because of the love of Christ. So the poverty of God designated not a social condition, but a disposition dictated by love of a gift of self to death and of radical service of all. So Francis understood the term poverty above all in this sense, that humility of God becoming a human being. He who was a creator becomes a creature. So his choice and his practice of material poverty, that is a refusal of all collective ownership of money, recalls at times of need or begging, was only an expression or a visible manifestation of this fundamental interior attitude. So the poverty as a disposition is this fundamental interior attitude of imitation of Christ, he who was God, who assumed our human nature. Now, that is what he celebrated lyrically by proclaiming the height of deep poverty to which one must be attached at all times, that attunement to Christ, who himself became poor because of the love of us, or put it in other words, raising our humanity into divinity of the marriage between humanity and divinity. However, when he speaks of the poor in the real sense of it, in whom he sees the image of the poor Christ, and when he concretely meets them, he does not sing the praises of our poverty, but seeks to free them from it. Meaning, when he's talking of the real poor, the materially poor, then he's not singing the image of, or in whom he sees the image of the poor Christ, he's not singing of poverty, but he wants to free them from that. And we do know this in a very explicit way because, as we are told, that one of the incidents that led to his conversion is when one day riding on his horseback, he sees this leper, and he mounts from his horse, comes and embraces this leper. And from then on, what was poor became sweet, because he saw, or he could see, the image of the poor Christ in this leper. And therefore, what he does actually, he goes to where they were staying. Remember, leprosy then, as it is today, was contagious. And even then, because advancement in medical arena was not as advanced as today, and therefore lepers were staying by themselves, at the fringes or the margins of society to avoid contagion with or contaminating other people, and therefore they were ostracized from the society, from the community, and therefore they were not only suffering physically or somatically because of their of the disease itself, but also psychologically because they are being distanced or separated from the society because of their health condition. Now, Francis, of course, before his conversion to the gospel, revealed himself to be generous and even prodigal toward them. It makes a condition for the admission of candidates to his fraternity that they sell all goods and distribute the proceeds to the poor, as the gospel asks us. And we can see this in the later rule, or the rule of what is called the rule of 1223. And also in his testament, number 16, you can read the same, that he required the brothers to, those who joined him, especially the very first 11 companions, to go sell what they had, distribute it among the poor people, and then come and join him. So without obliging them that far, he exhorts Christians determined to follow the gospel to practice almsgiving and also sharing of their goods. Of course, from the letter to the faithful, if you read the writings of Francis and Clare, there is this particular letter that Francis writes to the faithful. You will see that he exhorts Christians also of goodwill to do that, which is not something divorced from the Catholic teaching, especially the teaching of the time of Lent, that the three things we are called to do in the time of Lent is to fast, to give alms to the poor, and also to pray more. Now, he goes further in a very forceful passage, and he affirms the right of the poor to receive alms, that is, to receive what is necessary for their life and their dignity. So alms are an inheritance and a justice, a due that Jesus himself had acquired for them. And that's why helping the poor people, sharing with the poor people that which we have in extra. Francis looked at it as a justice that is due them, that they deserve it, and sharing with them out of our abundance. So then in confronting these 2 points of view, one sees that the notion that Francis, the poor Valero is a poor one, heart of poverty is much more complex and nuanced than one might think. There is one form of poverty that is God and of his Christ, that every Christian is duty-bound to imitate. This poverty consists in transcending of self or going beyond yourself through love, in a dependence upon others, in sharing of what one is and what one possesses. That is in humble service, that is like washing the feet of the other. Remember that gospel in the Gospel of John chapter 13, just before his passion, Jesus took water, put it in a basin and washed the feet of his apostles, and of course, to ask them or told them, you call me your master and I have done this to you, so do it to one another. And you remember we do this every Holy Thursday in the liturgical year. So the other poverty, that of lacking of insufficiency, which disfigures and destroys human grandeur or human dignity, is an evil that God detests and that humanity should strive to eliminate it. And that is, as we read from the book of Deuteronomy, that let there be no poor among you. And that is a poverty or poor who are deprived of basic necessities, the basic necessities of life. And you're talking of basic necessities of life, you're talking of those necessities that if you lack, you will die, like food, for example, and food and water and air, of course, and sleep. Now, when, despite of this, Francis with a minute, somebody was to be admitted here, 19 of us now, and we are. So when, despite of this, Francis with his brothers decide to lead a life of precarity and social or poverty, then he carries out a prophetic act that the situation of the church required, but which he did not propose to Christians living in the world. Now, let's look at the attitude to the poor. What was Francis's attitude to the poor? Remember, this is just a recap. I'm just having a recap for what we did last week, because I want to make sure that everybody, especially those who did not participate in our class last week, that they have this quick recap before we proceed on to looking at how Claire also compliments Francis in the milieu that both lived. So Francis and his fraternity situated themselves at the beginning of their spiritual enterprise in the category of the poor, while being conscious that being voluntarily poor, recognized as such by society and the church, was not the same as involuntary poverty. So here he distinguishes between those who are voluntarily poor and those who are involuntarily poor. So who are those who are voluntarily poor? They are those who opt to be poor out of imitation of Christ, as I have said, who was God and chose to become one of us or assumed a human nature. That is something that is voluntarily chosen or adopted. Involuntary poverty is a poverty of those who have who lack the basic means of survival, and therefore this kind of poverty ought to be eliminated. And we are going to see a number of qualifiers of this kind of poverty. Nevertheless, Francis seemed to know well the world of the poor of his time. We get a passage from actually the Aria Rule. When you read Aria Rule or the Rule of 1221.9.2, presents a complete and well worked out list and alludes to the relationship of the friars with the poor. That is, it's worth quoting in entirety, and here it is. The brothers should rejoice when they live among base and despised people, among the poor and the infirm, that is the sick, lepers, beggars, and those on the road, those on the road sides. That's what he quotes in the rule. So based and despised, these first two terms express the judgment that is usually brought upon those who today one would qualify as marginal, excluded, homeless, and untouchable. So when he's talking about those who are living in voluntary poverty, he's looking at all these people, the beggars, the lepers, the infirm, the sick, and those who are actually excluded from their homes because of their health condition. So the 5 following qualifiers seeks to determine their condition and the cause of their exclusion. General poverty, of course, first of all, is lack of necessity, that is clothing, food, and dwelling place, is a state of health, follows which is detailed in 3 terms. Infirm, that is fragile of body, the frankly sick, and finally the height of misery, that is the absolutely marginalized in the Middle Ages, and they were the lepers. And to complete the list, beggars, not the honorable ones who, as occurs among the friars, beg from door to door, but those seated beside the highways. So the text presupposes that the friars sometimes find themselves in contact with this world and live among them. And especially we see it explicitly from the life of Francis himself, who left his family and went to not only be close to the lepers in terms of being with them, but also nursing their wounds that are caused by leprosy. So in all these poor humans, Francis saw, in the words of the first biographer, that is Thomas of Celano, I'm sure you are doing this with Mesaga Tuku, the noble symbol of Christ, who made himself poor for us. That it's only when we see Christ in the poor person and therefore advance towards this person, be close towards this person, it is because of that, this identification with Jesus Christ, who was God and became a human person. So the call then is to be with them and serve them. So to rejoice when they live among the poor implies a fundamental attitude of respect for their human dignity and empathy, that is entering into their world, in their perspective, putting yourself in their shoes to understand their condition. That is a sharing in their distress, a readiness to serve them as to draw them out of that actually robs them of their human dignity. So not only being with them, but also like them. Also, Francis knew the world of the poor concretely through his contact with the lepers. He went and stayed with them, lived with them. So spontaneously, he abhorred them and fled from them. But once his heart had changed, after having recognized in each one of them a brother, human, and a Christian companion, he cared for them with tenderness and helped them with gifts of money, and especially with clothing. Now, while he forbade absolutely all use of money in his rule, especially chapter 5 of the rule of 1223, he made an exception when it came to using it for caring for lepers, because those were really the highly despised in the world of Francis. As was said above, the goods that the candidates to the order had to renounce were left to the poor, and to all the candidates were forcibly reminded of the duty to share. So then how did Francis actually live out this ideal or idealistic behavior? His biographer, Thomas of Celano, and I want to believe you're doing this with Movement One with Mr. Gatuku, described him thus: Francis wanted to live in everything like a poor man. It pained him to meet someone poorer than him. He only wore one scaffy habit, which he often gave to a poor man in the cold season. And remember, when you're talking overseas, you're talking of very cold season in winter. He begged cloaks and furs from the rich, but only in order to give them to the poor. Seeing a poor person bent under a load too heavy, he took it upon himself despite his weak health. And you can read this, of course, from the Second Life of St. Francis. Yes, you can get all these from the writings of Francis and Clare. Now, also, because of the radical poverty he had chosen, having neither good nor money, Francis could only dispose his clothing, reduced to strict minimum, a tunic and a cloak, that what he wore. And remember, he has left all the monies and the clothes there from his father's house and adopted for a life that is very, very radical in service of the poor. So it was in this very limited domain that he would place a whole series of gestures, which the biographer would delight in recounting as stories of cloak stolen and given away, as you read in the Second Life. Now, once even lacking everything else, he would give to a poor woman, as the mother of 2 of his brothers, the only copy of the New Testament they had, which at time was worth of a fortune. You can see he was really out there to really share with the poor whatever he saw that could really be of help to them if it could alleviate their involuntary poverty. And he decided that poor and beggars should receive presents from the rich on the great feasts, especially of Christmas and Easter. Now, as for the lepers, whose proximity and service were the origins of the Franciscan conversion, as he witnesses at the beginning of his testament, it does not appear that once his community was formed, he continued permanently in this practice, nor that he considered it as a regular component of the life of his brothers. So some, no doubt, we are able to serve in what we call leprosaria. That leprosaria is that place that takes care of the place that was taking care of the lepers as helpers or even administrators. So the itinerant friars, those are the ones, mendicants who walked on foot from place to place. And Francis himself stayed in leprosarias on the road as he recommended novices or those who had begged to join our life to spend some time there. So at the end of his life, Francis dreamt nostalgically of the times when he cared for lepers. So by contrast, he isolated attempt of one Friar John de la Capella, or John of the Chapel, to create an order of lepers, and came to a sudden end. Now, our first session is about to end. So when it ends, I'm going to stop this presentation. I'm going to schedule another lecture for 40 minutes. So I will ask you to take a very short break of 5 minutes after when this session is over, and then I will activate using the same link. I'm going to activate another class of 40 minutes. So from these descriptions and reflections on the behavior of Francis and his brothers towards the poor, what teaching and what inspirations can we draw today for us today? We are Franciscan brothers and sisters of today. So what is it that we learn from them? So one should remember, first of all, perhaps the important distinction, as I have made by Francis, between the fundamental poverty that he practiced and proposed to all, and the social poverty that is the involuntary one, And therefore, the first is founded on the poverty of humility of Christ and consists of the imitation of his abasement made out of love and in the service of human being. To be poor in this sense means to make oneself small and subject to all in order to be brother and a servant to all. Francis joined to his disposition of heart a radical social poverty relevant to the Middle Ages. He also knew that this type of poverty has no meaning in itself. It's always a far cry and from involuntary poverty, and is not everyone's vocation. We are going to stop here for this particular presentation. Take a short break of 5 minutes, and I will activate a 40 minutes lecture so that we finish that and we begin looking at the Millieu of Claire before I give you a chance to make